You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective. Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered, day 380 of this genocide. I was invited alongside Louise Adler AM to co-deliver the 13th annual UN International Day of Peace Brisbane Lecture. The St. John's Cathedral International Day of Peace event was co-hosted by the United Nations Association of Australia, Queensland Division and Just Peace. It was recorded at St. John's Anglican Cathedral on September 21. A very special thanks to the organising team behind the event and especially the very Reverend Dr. Peter Catt, the Anglican Dean of Brisbane. The entire event was recorded by the ABC Big Ideas crew, and there'll be a link in the podcast to listen to the entire event, which includes Louise's speech. Thank you all so very much. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement. As a Palestinian, I'm acutely aware of the advantage I have over our black brothers and sisters here on this land that always was and always will be Aboriginal. To the choir that sung that acknowledgement, thank you so very much. It was gorgeous. It is truly humbling. It is truly humbling to be here with you. I want to thank the United Nations Association of Australia, the Queensland Division, the very Reverend Peter Catt. Good news, you've got a Jew and a Palestinian's half Christian and half Muslim, so you've got the trifecta. You've got the trifecta. My dear friend Claire Moore, who's a past president and the vice president of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, she's here. Thank you so much. The team that put tonight together, and especially Louise for that wonderful oration. Thank you so very much. Every Palestinian with a microphone thinks that this is the day they can liberate Palestine. So mark it down in your diaries. Today is the day. I'm not going to put you under that much pressure. Tuesday or Wednesday next week will do. Everything I'm going to tell you I've been saying and speaking for my entire life, but also so many other Palestinian advocates before me, my father and so many others. What we are saying is not new. We are being afforded an opportunity to speak this truth because of the genocide that is happening in Gaza today. A digital live stream genocide that has put into the lounge rooms our very story that forever we held our own and were never able to communicate and were never afforded such august spaces. I'd like to take a moment to pause and reflect on the deaths of tens of thousands of Palestinians and the space that they've given us. It's impossible to talk about tomorrow and uniting for a just peace without talking about how we got here. Palestine is more than just a land. It's also a people cruelly discarded in the pursuit of a Jewish state. When you understand that no Palestinian is safe, we are all demographic threats in the pursuit of that Jewish safety and that Jewish state. Which is why we have maintained for the past 349 days of this genocide that this is not a war with Hamas, but a war on Palestinians. The first and foremost, most important fact is that Palestine existed. Palestine was there. Israel came to us. Israel is a settler colonial state where a superior people came to a land to civilize it. And we know what that looks like. We know what that looks like, be it here or in Aotearoa in New Zealand, Turtle Island. And we also know how poorly the Indigenous people fare when somebody comes to bring civilization. In Palestine, the British gave away land that was not theirs based on this racist, supremacist ideology that the natives mattered not. Zionists never hid the fact that they were colonialists. In fact, the father of Zionism, Theodore Herzl, wrote to Cecil Rhodes, the Rhodes Scholar Rhodes, who was at the time the most famous of colonialists, and he said to him, "You are being invited to help make history. It doesn't involve Africa, but a piece of Asia Minor. Not Englishmen, but Jews. How then do I happen to turn to you, since this is an out-of-the-way matter for you? How indeed, because it is something colonial." Zionists never ever denied that they were colonialists. They did in fact claim that Palestine was a land without people for a people without a land, their own version of terra nullius. Inconveniently, we existed. We lived, we laughed, we loved. We farmed the land for millennia. And who knows what our actual ancestry is? Are we Canaanites, Jebusites, Philistines, Anatolian or Lydian Greeks, Romanians, Romans, Arabs, Western Europeans, Nabateans, Western European Crusaders is what I meant to say earlier on, Ottomans, or any one of the dozens of conquests and reconquests of the Holy Land? What Zionists will have you believe is that in that timeline of conquest and reconquest, we're going to pick out one, and we're going to make that one the sole and exclusive and only owner of that land. In that land of so many different cultures and religions, to believe in the supremacy of just one is to make you a racist. It's to make you a Jewish supremacist. And that's exactly what Israel is. Palestinians don't deny Jewish connection or historical links to the land. We just don't accept that it's superior to ours. Jewish connection and the Zionist enterprise as it manifests itself as the state of Israel today are two very separate connections. European Jews had been trickling into Palestine in the late 19th century, seeking refuge from that European disease, anti-Semitism, that Louise was talking about. For Palestinians, the die was set in motion in World War I when everybody's favourite Arab, Lawrence, came along and on behalf of the British promised the Arabs independence if they fought in support of the war against the Ottomans and the Germans. After 400 years of Ottoman occupation, it sounded like a pretty good deal. And so the Arabs joined the Allies and we won. And if you go to any World War I memorial, you'll see Gallipoli, Al Alamein, and all the famous World War I battles, and you'll also see Palestine. We were there. We were the good guys. In fact, the charge of the Light Horse Brigade, the last modern cavalry charge in history, happened in Palestine as our diggers, because I'm Australian, I know I look like them, but I sound like us, our diggers swept through Beersheba on their way to Jerusalem and Damascus and ending the Ottoman Empire. That was the 31st of October 2017. The Arabs celebrated. Yay, we are free. Unbeknownst to us, only 2 days later, Arthur Balfour, the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, wrote to Lord Rothschild the infamous Balfour Declaration. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status of Jews in any other country. The only MP to oppose the Balfour Declaration was the only Jew in Parliament. His name was Edwin Montagu. He knew that Zionism was an anti-Semitic idea from the very start, reasoning that if there was a Jewish state, Jews will hereafter be treated as foreigners in every other country but Palestine. It was not long before the British and French carved up the Arab world into protectorates, also known as states, and it was like an episode of the Oprah Winfrey Show. Lebanon, you get a state. Syria, you get a state. Jordan, you get a state. Everybody got a state, but Palestine got a mandate. And we said, what's that mean? Don't worry, we'll tell you about it a bit later. Fast forward to the end of World War II and the culmination of 2,000 years of European anti-Semitism, and the horrors of the Holocaust are revealed to the entire world. The British then decided they would give the question of Palestine to the newly formed United Nations. The world can decide what to do now. At the time, there were 56 countries in the United Nations. There are 193 now. On the 22nd of November 1947, the UN General Assembly voted in favour of partitioning Palestine. 56 countries. 33 of them voted to partition Palestine, 13 against and 10 abstained. That's the sum total of 17% of the UN today. Decided the best course of action was to give my house to someone else because of what somebody else did. The UN partition was always a suggestion. This is often missed. There was no Security Council resolution supporting it. It had and still has no basis in international law. The partition of Palestine was and is illegal. The plan proposed giving 55% of Palestine to the Jews, who were less than 30% of the population, owning no more than 6% of the land. The Palestinians, 70% of the population that owned 94% of the land, were allocated just 45%. A terrible deal in anyone's language, and one that the Palestinians were certainly never to accept. The Zionists had been planning for this moment for years, aided and abetted by the British that still harboured imperialistic notions and wanted that strategic base on the cusp of Africa, Asia and Europe, enabled the Zionists to start their campaign to ethnically cleanse Palestine, to create a Jewish majority state in a land that has a Jewish minority. You have to demographically engineer that outcome. No one leaves their home voluntarily. A campaign of terror and massacres was unleashed. The most famous massacre, Deir Yassin, April 8, 1948, a sunny Friday afternoon when Jewish terror forces attacked Deir Yassin. 700 Palestinians lived in that village and had lived there for millennia. The Palestinians there, this is just outside of West Jerusalem, had even signed a non-aggression agreement with their neighbours and the Jewish terror gang, the Haganah. A British delegation report filed to the United Nations soon after the massacre states, the killing of some 250 Arabs, men, women and children, took place in circumstances of great savagery. Women and children were stripped, lined up, photographed, and then slaughtered by automatic firing, and survivors have told of even more incredible bestialities. Those who were taken prisoner were treated with degrading brutality. Deir Yassin had a psychological, demographic and political effect on Palestinians. News of this massacre spread panic amongst the Palestinians, prompting hundreds of thousands to flee. Deir Yassin was no mistake. Depopulating Palestine was not a consequence of war, but a carefully planned strategy called Plan Dalet, which was authorized by David Ben-Gurion, who would go on to become the first Prime Minister of the State of Israel. This was the first operation in the plan to Judaize Palestine. 540 Palestinian towns were systematically targeted by region. Those in the north were surrounded from the south, east and west. The sheikhs, the mukhtars, the priests, whoever the leaders of those villages were massacred. The seconds were massacred, the thirds, and then everyone else was told they had an hour. That if they did not run and tell the villagers in front of them, they would all suffer what had happened in Deir Yassin. That happened in the north and drove Palestinians to Lebanon, in the east and drove them into Jordan and the West Bank and south, into Gaza and Egypt. When these Jewish terrorist forces were done, they had ethnically cleansed 78% of Palestine and some 90% of the indigenous Palestinian population. We say in Arabic, "Akhaduha mafrushi." You don't build a country, a state, out of nothing. أخذوها مفروشي, they took Palestine furnished. The next day they harvested our crops, they milked our cows, they took the eggs from under our hens. In many homes, Jewish historians have spoken about the settlers arriving and still smelling the coffee that had been freshly brewed. This was the Nakba, the catastrophe. On the 5th of June 1967, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, Jordan, Iraq and Syria, and Israel controlled all of historic Palestine, from the river to the sea. Nearly 400,000 more Palestinians were added to the hundreds of thousands displaced in 1948. Around half were displaced a second time in under 20 years. That's when the settlement enterprise went into full swing. The Army General, Defence Minister, Prime Minister and war criminal Ariel Sharon screamed, "Everyone has to move, run and grab as many Palestinian hilltops as you can to enlarge the Jewish settlements, because everything we take now will stay ours. Everything we don't will go to them." Currently in the land from the river to the sea, historic Palestine, over 50% of that population is not Jewish. The challenge for Zionists, the conundrum for Zionism, is they want all of the land of historic Palestine, and they want it to be Jewish, and they want it to be democratic. But they can only have two of the three. It can be Jewish and democratic, but not all of the land. It can be democratic and all of the land, but not Jewish. Or what we have today, which is all of the land and Jewish, but not democratic, and there's a word for that, and that's apartheid. Palestinians have been saying so for decades alongside Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, recently joined by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and Israel's two foremost NGOs, B'Tselem and Yesh Din. In fact, even the ICJ's ruling in July, the International Court of Justice ruling in July, just a couple of months ago, stated that Israel was in breach of Article 3 of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and it states that parties particularly condemn racial segregation and apartheid and undertake to prevent, prohibit and eradicate all practices of this nature in territories under their jurisdiction. And we know what apartheid looks like. What does it look like for a Palestinian? Well, every Palestinian from the river to the sea uses the same currency. The birth registry and death registry is managed by the same controlling entity. Each stamp licked is the same. Every point of egress and entry, every element of every Palestinian's life is controlled by the same entity that controls every Jew's life, the State of Israel. But Palestinians don't get a chance to vote. That's apartheid. Every Palestinian is impacted by Israeli apartheid, even a Palestinian who's not in Palestine. It impacted me because it meant that my father couldn't fulfill his dying wish to be buried next to his mother and father in our ancestral home. A man born before the State of Israel came into existence was denied that death wish by an entity that never recognised him. As Louise said, any Jew anywhere on earth, irrespective of how religious they are, their lineage or ancestry, can any time choose to return and take up and be given immediate citizenship and all of the privileges that affords them. But the many millions of Palestinians like myself who live in diaspora, the millions who are refugees, are denied this very same right simply for the fact that we came from the wrong womb. Wanting everyone to be free from the river to the sea is not racist. Wanting only half the people from the river to the sea is racist, and that's Zionism. My friends, doing the right thing is never the wrong thing, even when it's hard, and Palestinians have not given up, and you must not. Law, justice and humanity is on our side. We just need the courage. We must stand up for what is right and resist the silencing, resist the campaigns. From the Sydney Theatre Company losing donors for actors donning a keffiyeh, the State Library of Victoria cancelling a writer's bookshop after trawling social media posts, our dear friend Louise, whose Adelaide Writers' Week was targeted and had funding withdrawn. The Melbourne Symphony Orchestra cancelling a concert because the world-renowned pianist Jason Gilham dedicated a piece to murdered Palestinian journalists. Journalist Antoinette Lattouf sacked for sharing a Human Rights Watch post that spoke about how Israel was using starvation as a weapon of war in Gaza, a post that the ABC itself had shared, through to the attack on academics and students at universities and yesterday's MacArthurite Senate inquiry into anti-Semitism on university campuses. On October 7, Israel could have looked inwards and asked itself, why did this happen? Instead, it asked, how did we let it happen? What did we do wrong security-wise? What more could we have done? And this is the crux of the issue. The problem with Zionism is that its basis is in supremacism, which means Zionists can only feel secure when Palestinians are totally insecure. And sadly, this is aided and abetted by a compliant and sycophantic West. I'm not going to go through the horrors that is the Gaza list. To actualise the barbarity and sheer inhumanity is so painful, it leaves me sobbing for hours each day. As depressing as all that sounds, I want you to know that it can and will be better. It can and will be better. A year and a bit ago, I was invited to a speaking tour in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I was met with some of the most wonderful guys and some of the most wonderful anti-apartheid era stories. And one of the stories I want to share with you is about some of the ANC crew that ended up in Aotearoa. And one of the men there, John Minto, who was a prime mover in the anti-apartheid struggle in Aotearoa, he asked them, he said, you know, we never thought that we were that close to ending apartheid. And the ANC guy said, are you kidding? In the late 80s, we took the whole leadership team away for a week and we put together the 50-year plan to end apartheid in South Africa. The only question we've got now is what to do with the other 45 years. The Palestinians have called for a South African-style boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign. It's been led by civil society and it was started in 2005, and it asks for consumers to boycott Israeli products, to make conscientious decisions to not support the State of Israel whilst it is in breach of all of its obligations in international law, whilst it occupies, while it brutalises and whilst it genocides. It asks for entities to divest from investments that are enabling this. It also asks for countries to sanction the State of Israel. Exactly what happened and how we ended apartheid in South Africa. We know that the will of the international community is the only thing stopping it, because we know the international community can do that. We saw them do that with Russia when they invaded the Ukraine. We just need to make our governments understand they must. Sometimes it takes decades for a day to happen, and sometimes decades happen in a day. And I believe the same is going to happen with Israel. Peace is closer when everyone and every country is treated equally and fairly, when double standards and hypocrisies are no longer entertained or allowed, and peace needs to start with each and every one of us. I want to share with you a little bright note to end, a story about Palestine and what it was and what it will be again. My father was born in a magical period of time in Palestine in 1926, at the end of the Ottoman Empire, and still a hope that our mandate would turn into a state and a belief that Palestine would be free. He was a street kid, if you will, running around the old city of Jerusalem, and he used to tell us over sweet tea What a joy it was to run through the old city. Because when you're a kid in those times, food wasn't that plentiful. But whenever there was a celebration, whenever there was a Eid in Arabic, a celebration, everybody got fed. And in Palestine, if you've ever been to the old city, and I'd commend a trip there to each of you, the Wailing Wall, the last remaining part of the last Jewish temple, the Dome of the Rock, where Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Christians believe Jesus was crucified. As the crow flies, it's about 400 metres. About 400 metres. Those children of Palestine ran the streets, but every now and again the bells rung differently. And it meant as a kid you got fed. And you didn't know if it was Yom Kippur, Easter, Christmas, Ramadan, Eid al-Adha. You had no idea, but you got fed. And my father and his two friends used to play marbles together. Avraham, and Ibrahim. English, Arabic and Hebrew. For the father of the three monotheistic religions. They would play marbles together, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. On Friday, Ibrahim would go to mosque. On Saturday, Avraham to temple. Sunday, Abraham to church. And on Monday, they'd play marbles together. That was Palestine. That will be Palestine. And when it is, you'll know that you did your part, that you stood up for what was right, that you weren't silent. And that's when we will have peace. Thank you all. You just listened to my speech from September 21 at St. John's Anglican Cathedral on September 21, where I was invited alongside Louise Adler AM to deliver the 13th Annual UN International Day of Peace Brisbane Lecture. Please make sure you get along to your local rally this weekend. Sign on to the actions at the APAN website demanding Australia sanction Israel. There are other actions there as well. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember, there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.
يشهر في الدنيا وتصدع أبواب تصدع سيف فليشهر في الدنيا وتصدع أبواب تصدع سيف فليشهر في الدنيا وتصدع أبواب تصدع الآن وليس غدا أجراس العودة فلتقرع الآن وليس غدا الآن وليس غدا أجراس العودة فلتقرع الآن وليس غدا أجراس العودة فلتقرع أجراس العودة فلتقرع أنا لا أنساك فلسطين ويشد بي البعد أنا في أفيائك نسرين أنا زهر الشوك أنا الورد أنا لا أنساك فلسطين ويشد بي البعد أنا في أفيائك نسرين أنا زهر الشوك أنا الورد ندك الأسوار نستلهم ذاك الغار ونعيد إلى الدار نمحو من نار النار ندك الأسوار نستلهم ذاك الغار ونعيد إلى الدار نمحو من نار النار فلتصدع أبواق أجراس تقرع قد جن دم الأحرار فليشهد في الدنيا وتصدع أبواق تصدع الآن وليس غدا أجراس العودة الآن وليس غدا الآن وليس غدا أجراس العودة فلتقرع
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.